What kind of desperation drives a 12-year-old boy to walk into a biker clubhouse and ask for help? Theo Stewart had one request that would change everything. I need a noise loud enough to scare a man. What the Highway Saints did next didn't just shake the neighborhood. It shattered the silence that had been killing his family for years. The garage bay doors were halfway down when Theo Stewart slipped through the gap, his sneakers barely making a sound against the oil-stained concrete. Dusk leaked through the garage windows as the last wrenches clinked into trays, the smell of fuel and hot metal settling heavy in the air. Rocco spotted him first, a scrawny kid swimming in a jacket 3 sizes too large despite the September heat. The boy's eyes darted across the shop, taking inventory of the men, the bikes, the exits. Rocco knew that look. He'd worn it himself once, measuring distances, calculating risks. We're closing, kid, Cherry called from behind the parts counter, her voice not unkind. She was wiping grease from her hands, the club's secretary and the only woman who could make grown men apologize for cursing. Come back tomorrow if your dad needs work done. I don't have a dad. Theo's voice came out steady, rehearsed. I need to ask you something. Garrett emerged from the back office, his president's patch catching the fluorescent light. 20 years in corrections had taught him to read body language fluently, and the boy looked like every breath was an act of discipline, as if he'd built himself from scraps just to stay standing. The way he kept his left arm tucked close, protective, broken ribs maybe, or worse. What can we do for you, son? Theo took 3 steps forward, close enough that they could see the yellow-green shadow of a fading bruise along his jaw. His next words came out in a rush. I need a noise loud enough to scare a man. Andrew stopped mid-swing with his wrench. Cherry's hand froze on the register. Rocco straightened slowly, his full attention locked on the boy who couldn't have been older than 12. That's a strange request, Garrett said carefully. What kind of man needs scaring? Theo's jaw worked for a moment before he found the words. The kind who only hits when he thinks nobody's listening. The silence that followed had weight. Rocco felt something crack open in his chest, something he'd buried at 14 when he finally grew tall enough to fight back. He remembered his own mother's whispered apologies, the way she'd blame herself for his father's fists. Remembered hiding in closets while the man who was supposed to protect them turned their home into a war zone. Your mom's boyfriend? Cherry's voice had softened to something dangerous. Theo nodded. Keith. He's careful, the kind who knows exactly where pain won't show. But at night, when he thinks the neighbors are asleep, his voice cracked. He cleared his throat, angry at himself. She tells me to put on headphones. Turn the music up loud. But I can still hear her. Garrett exchanged glances with Rocco, then Andrew, then Cherry. 20 years of brotherhood meant they could hold entire conversations without speaking. Andrew nodded. Cherry's lips pressed into a thin line. Rocco's fist clenched at his side. And you think noise will stop him? Garrett asked. He ran once, Theo said. 3 months ago when the fire trucks came for the apartment next door. All those sirens, all those people watching, he just left. Didn't come back for 2 days. That was the only time she didn't. He swallowed hard. That was the only time. Rocco crouched down, bringing himself to the boy's eye level. Up close, he could see the exhaustion carved into that young face, the kind that came from sleeping with one ear always open, always listening for danger. What's your name? Theo. Theo Stewart. Theo, I'm Rocco. That's Garrett, Cherry, and Andrew. He gestured to each in turn. How'd you find us? Everyone knows where the Highway Saints are. Theo's eyes flicked to the patches on their cuts, the skull and wings logo. People say you're dangerous. I figured, maybe that's what we need. Garrett felt the weight of those words settle over them. Out in the world, they were the men parents warned their kids about. The outlaws, the ones who lived outside polite society's rules. But in this moment, standing in front of a 12-year-old boy who'd walked through his fear to ask for help, They were something else entirely. "Give us a minute, Theo." Garrett nodded toward the bench near the door. "Have a seat." The four of them moved to the back corner, voices low. Cherry spoke first. "That kid just handed us his whole life. If we do nothing, we're not doing nothing." Rocco cut in, his voice rough with something that might have been rage or grief. "I was him. I was that kid hiding in headphones, pretending everything was fine, while my old man used my mother as a punching bag." Andrew, who rarely spoke more than 3 words at a time, surprised them all. "My sister. Same thing. By the time we found out, she'd already stopped believing anyone would help." Garrett thought about all the intake reports he'd filed, all the children with hollow eyes who'd slipped through every crack in the system. Thought about the badge he'd turned in because wearing it while the innocent suffered felt like a betrayal of everything it was supposed to mean. "We call church," he said finally. "Tonight. Full vote. But Theo doesn't leave here alone, and he doesn't go home without a plan." They returned to find the boy sitting rigid on the bench, hands clasped between his knees like he was praying, or preparing to run. "Theo," Garrett said, "you came to the right place." Past 2 in the morning, 19 Harleys rolled through the sleeping streets of Theo's neighborhood like thunder given form. They didn't rev unnecessarily. They didn't need to. The combined roar of their engines was enough to wake the dead, enough to rattle windows 3 blocks over. Keith stumbled out of the apartment building in his undershirt, eyes wide with something that looked a lot like the fear he'd been teaching others to feel. The Saints sat astride their bikes, silent judges in leather and chrome. They didn't speak, didn't threaten, just existed, impossible to ignore, impossible to dismiss. He ran. Inside apartment 3C, Martha Stewart sat on her couch, her son pressed against her side, and listened to the most beautiful sound she'd heard in 2 years, the noise of people who refused to look away. The alarm on Theo's phone went off at 6:30, same as always. What wasn't the same was the sound of heavy boots on the stairs outside, or the knock that came exactly 3 minutes later. Rocco stood in the hallway holding 2 gas station coffees, one black, one so loaded with cream and sugar it barely qualified as coffee. He'd been awake since 4, unable to sleep after the adrenaline of the night before wore off and left him alone with memories he'd spent 20 years trying to bury. "Figured you could use an escort," he said when Theo opened the door, still in his pajamas, eyes red from sleeping without listening for danger. Martha appeared behind her son, her hand instinctively moving to his shoulder. Protective. Rocco noticed the way she positioned herself between them, ready to be a shield if needed. He recognized that stance too. "Ma'am, I'm Rocco. We met last night, sort of." He offered a careful smile. "Thought I'd walk Theo to school. Make sure word gets around that he's got people watching out for him." Martha's eyes searched his face for a long moment. Finally, she nodded. "Give me 5 minutes to get him ready." Those morning walks became routine. The first week, they barely spoke, just the sound of sneakers and boots hitting pavement, the distant roar of traffic, birds arguing in the trees. Theo would glance sideways at this man covered in tattoos and scars, trying to reconcile him with the father figures he'd seen in movies. On the 8th day, Rocco broke the silence. "I was 9 when my old man taught me what fear really sounded like." He said it like he was commenting on the weather, hands shoved in his jacket pockets. "Told the school I fell off my bike. They believed it because that's what they wanted to believe. Easier than making phone calls, filing reports, dealing with angry parents." Theo's steps faltered. Rocco kept walking. "I'm not telling you this for pity. I'm telling you because I need you to understand something. What happened to you, what's still happening, it wasn't your fault. And the fact that you walked into that garage and asked for help, that took more guts than most grown men have. Did it get better?" Theo's voice was small. "For you. Eventually. But not because I waited for it to fix itself." Rocco stopped at the crosswalk, pressed the button. "I got angry. Real angry. Spent my teenage years looking for fights, trying to prove I was nothing like the scared kid hiding in closets. Nearly destroyed myself before Garrett found me bleeding out behind a bar at 19. Gave me two choices: die stupid or live different. The light changed. They crossed. The saints became my family. Taught me that strength isn't about hitting harder. It's about showing up for people who need you. That patch I wear? I earned it by protecting people, not hurting them. Meanwhile, at the clubhouse, Andrew was dragging something from the storage shed. A rusted minibike frame that hadn't seen daylight in 5 years. He laid it out on a workbench like a surgeon preparing for operation, then stood there studying it with the intensity he usually reserved for custom motorcycle builds. Cherry found him there an hour later, parts spread across every available surface. "What are you doing?" "Kid needs a project." Andrew wiped his hands on his already filthy rag. "Something to focus on that isn't fear. That thing's been dead since before Theo was born. Everything can be fixed." Andrew picked up a corroded bolt, examined it against the light. "Just takes patience and the right tools." When Theo arrived after school that Thursday, Andrew simply gestured to the workbench. "You wanted noise. This'll make plenty once we get it running. But first, you've got to understand how every piece works." Theo approached slowly, running his fingers over the rusty frame. "I don't know anything about engines." "Good. Then I can teach you right." Andrew handed him a wrench. "First lesson. Everything that's broken shows you exactly how to fix it. You just have to pay attention." They worked in comfortable silence, Andrew's instructions coming in fragments. Counterclockwise. Firm grip. Feel that resistance? That's the thread catching. Across the hall, Mr. Harlan stood at his window with his third beer, watching Rocco walk Theo home. His reflection showed a stranger. Hands that rebuilt transmissions now trembled holding coffee. 2 years of hearing Martha through thin walls. Crying, furniture scraping, silence. 2 years of excuses. Then the motorcycles came and Harlan wept for Eleanor, dead 15 years from falls he'd chosen to believe. The morning after the saint's intervention, he'd walked to the clubhouse with 2 cups of coffee and a confession that tasted like ashes. Now he knocked on Andrew's bay door, toolbox in hand. "Heard you got a kid learning mechanics." Harlan's voice cracked. "Used to teach apprentices at the Ford plant before they shut it down. If he needs help, I've got time." Andrew studied him for a long moment, saw the shame and desperation painted across that weathered face. Saw a man trying to rebuild himself the same way they were rebuilding that minibike. Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. "And Harlan, don't show up drunk." Harlan nodded, his throat too tight for words. By the end of October, Theo had memorized the name of every bolt, every gasket, every piece of that machine. He'd learned that Andrew measured twice and cut once. That Harlan's hands might shake, but his knowledge was diamond sharp. That Rocco's morning walks had become the safest part of his day. The minibike was still months from running, but something else was already humming to life. A version of Theo Stewart who was learning that broken things didn't have to stay broken, and that the loudest noise wasn't always the one that saved you. Sometimes it was the quiet sound of people showing up, day after day, teaching you that you mattered. Martha Stewart had always been good at making herself small. Soft voice, apologetic smile, shoulders curved inward like she was trying to disappear into her own chest. When she walked into Cherry's office at the clubhouse on a gray November morning, she looked like someone preparing to ask forgiveness for existing. Cherry recognized that posture immediately. She'd worn it herself once, back when her ex-husband convinced her that love was supposed to hurt. "Sit." Cherry pushed a mug of coffee across the desk, noting how Martha's hands trembled when she reached for it. "You're not in trouble. You're not a burden. And you don't have to explain yourself to me." Martha's eyes filled. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do now." "Now you figure out what you want your life to look like." Cherry slid relocation assistance forms across the desk alongside restraining order paperwork that only needed Martha's signature. There was a job opening at Mike's auto shop, our affiliate across town. Pays decent, flexible hours so you can be there when Theo gets home. I can't accept all this. You can and you will. Cherry's voice carried the steel that had kept her alive through her own war. You know what the hardest part is? Not accepting help. It's believing you deserve it. Martha stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. A language where women got to choose their own paths instead of navigating around men's fists. What if he comes back? Then Deputy Harris arrests him, and we make sure he understands what happens to men who ignore restraining orders in this town. Cherry leaned forward. Martha, that night with the motorcycles? That was us making noise. This is us making sure the noise meant something. Over the following weeks, Martha signed papers with hands that shook less each time. She started at Mike's shop doing inventory and answering phones, her voice gradually finding volume. The other mechanics treated her with careful respect, word having spread about the woman the saints were protecting. Deputy Harris became a regular presence, though his visits felt more like check-ins than investigations. He'd known Garrett since before either of them wore their respective uniforms, back when they were just two kids trying to survive the same brutal neighborhood. Found something interesting, Harris said one afternoon, spreading files across Garrett's desk. Keith Clarkson. 3 previous complaints across Missouri and Tennessee. Victims always dropped charges. The system never connected them. Garrett studied the reports, his jaw tightening with each page. How'd he keep slipping through? Same way they all do. Moves before paperwork catches up. Charms his way into new relationships before the old ones can warn anyone. Harris tapped one particular report. But this time we've got documented evidence, multiple witnesses, and a victim who's not running scared anymore. You can make charges stick? I can make them hurt. Harris gathered the files. The legal system failed these women before. Not this time. Martha's transformation accelerated when Cherry took her to the women's shelter where she volunteered. Walking through those doors, seeing the hollow-eyed women and frightened children, Martha recognized the woman she'd been. Recognized Theo in every kid who flinched at sudden movements. Anna sat in the corner, 19 and pregnant, avoiding eye contact. Martha sat beside her. I told myself it wasn't that bad, that I could fix it by trying harder, staying quieter. Anna turned. Then my son asked strangers to save us because I couldn't. Anna's hand found Martha's. They sat there for 20 minutes without speaking, 2 women learning that survival was just the beginning. Living came next. Mrs. Grace from 4B stopped hiding behind closed curtains. When she heard shouting below, she called the police instead of turning up her television. At the corner store, teenagers who used to smirk at Theo now nodded with something approaching respect. Word had spread that the quiet kid had an entire motorcycle club watching his back. But more than that, people were talking about what the saints had done, not with fear but with something like hope. My mom won't leave, a 15-year-old girl named Sophie told Garrett one evening when she showed up at the clubhouse. But I hear him hurting her every night. Could you do what you did for Theo? Garrett looked at this child brave enough to ask for help, and saw the ripple expanding outward from that first night. One boy's desperate request had become a movement. We can, he said, but let's do it right. Deputy Harris, advocacy groups, legal protection. The noise we made for Theo was a wake-up call. Now we make sure the whole system stays awake. By December, Martha was leading support groups at the shelter. Her voice no longer apologized for taking up space. When she spoke about Keith, about the years of violence and the shame she'd carried, other women leaned forward with recognition. I thought I was protecting my son by staying quiet, she told them. Turns out I was teaching him that silence was survival. The night those motorcycles came, I learned that sometimes the most protective thing you can do is let yourself be loud. Cherry watched from the doorway, remembering the terrified woman from weeks ago. Transformation came in small rebellions. The noise hadn't just scared away one man. It had given permission for an entire community to stop pretending they couldn't hear the suffering happening behind closed doors. The mini bike coughed to life on a Saturday morning in late March, months after Theo first laid eyes on the rusted frame. The sound wasn't thunder. It was something smaller, scrappier. A defiant sputter that said, "I'm here and I'm not going anywhere." Theo sat astride it in the clubhouse parking lot, Andrew on one side, Harlan on the other, both men wearing grins that made them look decades younger. Rocco stood back with his phone out, recording. "Easy on the throttle," Andrew instructed. "She's got power now, but respect takes practice." Theo eased forward, wobbling slightly before finding his balance. The minibike hummed beneath him, not loud enough to scare anyone, but loud enough to announce his presence. He circled the lot before pulling up in front of Garrett with his chest heaving and eyes bright. "I built that," Theo said, like he couldn't quite believe it. "We built that." "You did the work," Harlan corrected, his voice thick. "We just showed you where the pieces went." The clubhouse had evolved into something the Saints barely recognized. The back room that used to host poker games now held boxes of donated supplies for the shelter. The bulletin board displayed flyers for Deputy Harris's new community reporting program, a system where people could anonymously report domestic situations, with trained advocates responding alongside law enforcement. Harris himself sat at the bar, reviewing case files with Garrett. Keith Clarkson was awaiting trial across state lines, the weight of 4 documented cases finally catching up to him. Harris had built something airtight, a legal cage that wouldn't open on charm or excuses. "The shelter's asking if we can expand the mentorship program," Harris said, sliding a proposal across the counter. "Match at-risk kids with volunteers. Teach them skills, give them safe spaces." Garrett scanned the document, seeing Rocco's name already listed as a volunteer coordinator. "We're a motorcycle club, not a social service. You're whatever you choose to be." Harris stood, collecting his files. "That night you rolled 19 bikes through a residential neighborhood. You stopped being just a club. You became something that scared neighborhood needed. Proof that someone gives a damn." Spring brought changes that felt less like transformation and more like natural growth. Martha bought a car with her savings, nothing fancy, but hers, titled in her name alone. She drove herself to work now, to the shelter, to pick up Theo from the clubhouse. Each mile she traveled felt like reclaimed territory. Mr. Harlan opened his garage 2 afternoons a week, teaching neighborhood kids basic mechanics. The first week, 3 kids showed up. By April, he had a waiting list. He worked with shaking hands and sharp memory, building something he should have built decades ago when his wife was still alive to see it. "You think she'd be proud?" he asked Martha one evening when she came to collect Theo. Martha looked at the half-dozen kids covered in grease and concentration, at this old man who'd spent years drowning in regret and was now teaching children that broken things deserved fixing. "I think she'd be grateful you finally forgave yourself," Martha said. "I know I am." Sophie's mother left her abusive partner in February. Mrs. Grace's daughter 2 floors down got a restraining order in March. Each departure felt less like an ending and more like a woman finally believing she deserved a different story. The Saints didn't ride out for each one, they didn't need to. The first intervention had been loud enough to echo. The clubhouse barbecue in April mixed neighborhood families with leather-clad bikers. Kids circled motorcycles while parents discussed weather and baseball, ordinary things that felt extraordinary. Theo rode his mini-bike around the block with a pack of younger kids chasing after him on bicycles, their laughter carrying over the smell of grilling meat. He pulled up to where Rocco stood nursing a beer, killed the engine, and just sat there grinning. "Remember when you asked me if it got better?" Rocco asked. Theo nodded. "This is what better looks like. Messy, imperfect, but real." Rocco gestured to the scene around them. Martha laughing with Cherry, Harlan teaching a kid how to check tire pressure, Garrett deep in conversation with Harris about expanding the reporting program. "You started this, you know?" One kid brave enough to ask for help. I was scared, Theo admitted. Being scared doesn't make you weak. Walking through that garage door while scared? That's what courage actually looks like. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the parking lot, the saints gathered for a photo. Not just the members, everyone. Martha and Theo, Harlan with grease under his nails, Sophie and her mother, the mentorship kids, Deputy Harris. A family that had assembled itself from broken pieces and stubborn hope. Garrett looked at them all and thought about the boy who'd slipped through those garage doors 6 months ago asking for noise loud enough to scare a man. They'd given him that noise. But more importantly, they'd stayed after the engines quieted. Theo fired up his mini bike one more time, the engines purr barely audible over the conversations around him. He rode a slow lap around the assembled crowd, head high, surrounded by people who'd proven that the most dangerous silence was the one that pretended suffering didn't exist. The noise they'd made that night wasn't about fear. It was about refusing to let violence happen in the dark where no one would acknowledge it. It was about showing up and staying, about teaching a boy his voice mattered. The Highway Saints didn't just rescue one boy that night. They reminded an entire community that silence protects no one. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is make noise when others need to be heard. What would you have done in Theo's place? Or in Mr. Harlan's? Share your thoughts below. And if this story moved you, subscribe to embrace the journey for more stories that prove courage comes in unexpected forms. See you in the next video.